Welcome back to another Lab tutorial. Today we're going to be talking about panning drums. Specifically, we're going to be talking about a couple different main approaches to panning drums and why those approaches exist, why they differ from one another, and what is the point of panning the drums in the first place. Well, obviously, we want as wide a mix as possible, as wide a sound as possible. And the worst thing you can do for a project is leave everything running right down the middle. And what I mean by running right down the middle is that nothing is panned right or left. You're going to end up with an incredibly congested and conflicted mix. It's going to be muddy, it's going to be busy, there's not going to be a whole lot of clarity. Things are just not going to sound professional in any way. So what we want to do is leave some things in the center that are the main focal points, and then we're going to move other things to the sides. And what that's going to do is it's going to create more room for all of the sounds, just like we have to make room for each individual sound in the mix frequency wise. We also want to do the same with our stereo spread, or the position in the stereo field. Okay, now we're not talking about bouncing a stereo master or mix at this point. We're simply talking about center, right, and left, and that's it. So what we're going to do first is break down the traditional approach to panning drums, and that's going to be using this little sequence here. I've just grabbed a couple of very simple samples and tossed them in here so you guys can see which things are being used where in conjunction with what we're doing here in the mixer. The second beat that we'll be looking at is a much more modern take on how to pan drums, much more in line with the digital or electronic music scene. A lot more percussive elements are being used, a lot more call and response in electronic music grooves compared to the traditional, drum kit, real live drummer playing to real live instruments, whether they be acoustic or electric. So let's jump right into this. So this is the beat, and keep in mind that this is just for, example. Not supposed to be the greatest beat in the world. I want to keep everything very simple and separate so you can hear the differences when we start moving things around through panning. All right, so here's our beat. Pretty unimpressive. And you'll also notice that each one of the sounds is a bit constricted. So I'm going to play this one more time through just so you can have it fresh in your ears, and then we're going to start moving things around. Okay. Okay. Now, let's start with the kick drum. Kick drum needs to be the focal point. So does the snare. So both of those are actually going to stay in the center. There are exceptions to every rule, and experimentation is always a good thing to maintain as your as like a constant thing that you do. So play around with that in your own projects. Everything is different, but good rule of thumb to start with at least is kick and snare in the center. Now let's approach this from the traditional point of view first. The original approach to panning drums is to put yourself in the drummer's chair, seat. It's actually called a throne. The kick drum is right in the center. The snare is just a little bit off of center, but we're going to call it center for now. The hi-hat is just to your left. Now the first tom and the second tom, the rack high and rack mid tom, are just off center as well from the kick drum. So we're going to set that up accordingly. So kick is going to stay in the center. We'll leave snare in the center. Hi-hat, let's move this over, say, like 20? Does that sound fair? Maybe we'll put the, we're not using second hi-hat, the first tom, maybe we put that at like 10, maybe 15. We'll try it at 10 first and see what that sounds like. All right. Okay, so there was actually a pretty decent amount of separation there. Let's push this out to 15. what we want to make sure we do is that each thing has enough space. So these are pretty close to one another. And if you're dealing with a lot larger project or drum mix, then you also want to avoid having things set to the same number on either side of the pan spectrum, and we'll get to that in this second example. So let's listen to this again with those first and second toms panned a little bit more extremely. Okay, so there's a fair bit of separation there now. Let's listen to that one last time, and then we'll listen to it how it was before, just so you can again refresh your ears. Listen to this. I'm going to change the hi-hats back to the center. Change the toms to center. Everything is still there and everything sounds okay. It's just that there's a lot more room for everything to breathe. Everything gets set in its own little place through panning. Okay. Did you notice how cleaner the kick drum and snare drum sounded? A little bit crisper. All right, so we are back to everything being right down the middle here. There's no panning taking place. Now let's listen to the second sequence, which is much more in line with the more modern digital or electronic music production. Okay, obviously there's a lot more going on. There are a lot more elements to deal with. So panning becomes even more crucial because there's so much more competition. It's just like if you have a lot of different instruments playing across the same frequency range in your mix, it just becomes competitive and it's really difficult for any one thing to shine through. Therefore, it's really difficult to as a listener, really grasp onto any one thing and follow it, or be impressed by it really, because everything is happening at once in the same shared space. So let's see what we can do about fixing that. We're still using just one kick drum, we're using one snare, going to leave those in the center again, but this time we have two hi-hats going. Now let's solo these and just listen to them playing in the center here. Okay, now, what do we have these at? 20, something like that before? Oops. So let's do that again here. Now let's listen to that same exact hi-hat pattern again. Probably a good time to mention you should be wearing headphones while you listen to this so you can really hear the full impact. Now let's unsolo these so we can hear the whole drum part again with just the hi-hats panned. There's already more room in that drum mix. This is great. Now, let's do the toms. We were at 15, I think, in the last one. Let's do that as well in this one. Actually, before we do that, we'll give you the chance to hear them on their own. We'll solo them. Okay, now we're going to pan them. You can also double click on any knob or value field in anywhere in Logic, just as a quick pro tip here, and type in the numbers you want. Okay, so there's a lot more movement happening there, a lot more separation. Let's listen to this in context. Okay, a little bit more room, a little bit more width. Now we have these 4 glitch elements that I've added. These types of things are pretty darn common in modern music production, adding texture, interest, atmosphere in some cases. So let's take a look at this one, and this one seem to be the longest. Let's push those way out to the edges. Okay, and this is where things really start to get good for mid-side projects. You mix and master in mid-side mode nowadays, and you're no longer looking at just traditional left and right stereo channels. You're looking at the center and the edges of your project. Let's move these out to say, what, like 35 or something. Let's keep these glitches a bit more on the extreme side. So we've balanced 2 and 3 against each other at right to 35 and left to 35, and glitch 1 and 4 made more extreme, yet still balanced. Left 50 on 1 and plus 50, or to the right 50, on glitch 4. Now let's listen to all of that in context. All right. Again, not the greatest beat in the world, but we've seen and heard the difference that it makes to take the time to do this. Now, you can also play with moving the snare just a little bit off center if you happen to be producing a type of music where the kick and the snare are hitting on the same exact beat at the same exact time. Another way that you can create more separation is through swing, where you offset the timing of one or more elements in the entire drum mix. Oftentimes it's going to be the hi-hat, the claps, the snares, those types of things, those accents, and it can also create quite a bit of extra space. Now, if we were to pan this snare just barely to the left and listen to it, you're really not going to hear a big difference. There's really no point in doing it. It is actually pretty detrimental in a situation like this because it takes away the center focus, and now the sound is perceived as quieter. Now, there's other things playing into that as well, but simply put, if you keep it in the center, if there's no reason to move it, then you don't have to move it. That's just speaking for drums, of course. So I hope this helped clear things up a little bit for you in regards to why you pan things and where you would like to pan things. Of course, these are rules of thumb, great place to start, but you should always keep an open mind for your own project, experiment a bit, and see what works best for your stuff. That's not a get out of jail free card as far as like someone trying to teach the lesson of panning. It's more just a reminder that the number one rule in all audio and music production is listen and judge with your ears. Don't listen to what other people have to say about your projects. It's great to get rules of thumb from people and best practices, pro tips, tips and tricks, all that kind of stuff. But it's pretty easy to be misled or led in a direction that may not be best for your own production. So take the time to play around with your own stuff. Dial in varying values, whether they're subtle or extreme, for your panning direction, and see what it does to your mixes. All right, that's it for panning. Tune in again soon, and thanks for watching. Take care.